Rachel Holt for NESN.com with the honor of chatting with NFL Network's Adam Rank for this week's Fantasy Football Podcast. Adam started working with the NFL in 1995. He appears on NFL Fantasy Live, and you can hear him on the NFL Fantasy Live podcast. Adam, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I also should let you know that we have a brand new show coming out this fall called Fantasy and Friends. And I don't know if I'm supposed to tell everybody that I'm going to be on that show. So I don't know. But it's there. It's out there. It's out in the world now. So, yeah, so check that out as well.
Okay, perfect. We love to get you in trouble on this podcast.
I know. I immediately step into it right off the bat. I'm like, hey, I'm breaking news. So that's what I do. I'm a news breaker.
You brought that upon yourself. We'll look out for that this year. The next week is an important one in the fantasy football world. We're getting down to the wire. The first game of the season is September 8th, and a lot of people are holding their fantasy drafts this weekend or next weekend. This is it. Can you believe it's finally here?
I know. It seems like when you get like a couple of months away, you're like, I can't wait for it to get here, can't wait for it to get here. Then all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, it's here and I'm not ready. And so, that's kind of the mode I'm in right now. I've got a number of drafts. I traditionally like to put all my drafts on this upcoming Saturday. It's a Saturday before Labor Day, before everybody goes away with their family or people got barbecues or whatever, and you've got so many time commitments. So this is like the perfect weekend. This will be the last time the starters play. So if you can make it happen like late enough on Saturday, that's a pretty good option because then you should be clear injury-wise.
This is a big weekend, so let's help out all the people like you who are drafting this weekend. Let's start out with the basics. One of the first things you do is you pick a fantasy name. Don't overlook this part. It's a huge deal. It can intimidate the other people in your league and start your season off on the right foot. So, Adam, what are some of your tips for picking the perfect team name?
Well, it depends on who you're a fan of and what your friends are into and anything like that. Because, you know, if your friends are into WWE, you could always just throw out the Glorious, which is now the new thing with all the WWE fans, or more NXT people. I'm a Bears fan, and I have a bunch of friends in my league who are Bears fans. So I was the first to snatch up the team name last year, forgetting Brandon Marshall. So I thought that was, you know, and plus I'm a Jason Segel fan going back to his time in How I Met Your Mother. So of course that just fit in perfectly. Probably the best one I saw was the Hambre Packers, based on the meme of the slain, what was it, the gorilla at the Cincinnati Zoo, which I go, you know what, that's pretty clever. Because that thing always shows up in your Twitter timeline, and some kid tweeted that to us the other day, and I'm like, you know what, well done. Like, I think you win the day. You can take it off. I did see, there was some dude, because we've been doing this for NFL.com, for our social site, and some dude had the Blair Walsh Project, and he had an actual photo out in the woods looking all confused and scared. And anybody who's willing to go to that extra mile to take the photo so you have it on the avatar, that's pretty good. What's yours, though? What are some of yours?
One of my favorites that I've seen here in New England is nobody puts Brady in a corner. We're all standing by our quarterback. In one of my leagues, You Got Beat by a Girl is my team name, so I just like to get cocky from the start of the season, and then it's really all downhill from there.
You got to set the tone. You always hear about people saying, we got to set the tone, and a good name always sets that tone.
Do not overlook this part. It's very important to pick the perfect fantasy name, but on to more important things, let's actually make use of your talents. Let's talk draft strategy. We all love drafting wide receivers, but we're typically scared of running backs. So in an ideal draft, what is your strategy for success?
Yeah, I think a lot of people have started looking at the zero RB theory that was first put out into the atmosphere by Sean Spiegel. And it's become like a lightning rod of controversy in the fantasy football community because you have like old school people who just won't even listen to like new things. It's like trying to get somebody to get off dial-up or whatever they're doing. It's because the double RB thing is so antiquated now to me that it just doesn't really make a lot of sense. But I don't go full zero RB because I don't want to go too heavily one way or the other. I always want to have the ability to adjust, kind of like the amoeba, you know, so, and kind of like just kind of flow with the draft because sometimes you're in drafts where like everybody's going, you know, heavy wide receiver. So then maybe you wait at the end of the first round and you take David Johnson or something like that. So take advantage of it that way. Because that's the whole reason zero RB became popular was that everybody was so RB heavy that you could just have your pick of the wide receivers. But if everybody's going to sit there and pick off the wide receivers, well, then make sure you get the top running backs and go that way and zig whenever other people are zagging. So I like the idea of going in and targeting wide receivers as much as possible. But, if it doesn't work out that way, I'm willing to change on the fly.
All right, and who are you eyeing as the number one pick this year?
I think Antonio Brown is probably the consensus number one. And he was somebody I was very hyper on last year. And now that everybody's on board, it's like one of those things you're like, really? Like, do I want to be a part of it? And I don't want to be like the indie rock fan who's like a fan of the Hold Steady or something. And like, whoa, everybody likes him now. I hate him. And I don't want to be that guy. But at the same time, I got to be that guy a little bit. I'm like, oh, it's a little troubling that everybody's into it. But I'm so pot committed into Antonio Brown now. I can't talk myself out of it, and I can't really go another way. But I've been in drafts where I've had like the second, third, maybe even the fourth pick, and I've ended up with either Odell Beckham Jr. or Julio Jones and felt pretty good about it and a little bit relieved because it's a lot of pressure because I don't know. It's not rational and it's not based on any science or anything like that. And as much as I like crunching the numbers and watching film and everything like that, you got to have a little bit of intuition. And somebody if you've been around sports long enough, you kind of develop that. And so I love Antonio Brown. There's nothing about him that's bad. But, again, it's the fact that everybody's into it. You're just going to like, oh, I don't know. So I do like Julio. Julio Jones, though, is one who always kind of stands out to me as well because obviously he's great with the receptions, great with the receiving numbers. He had 1,800 last season. And I think he can even build on that, which seems a little ridiculous given the outrageous total that he had. But really, who's getting the target share in Atlanta? Who's fighting him for those receptions? There's not a lot of options down there, even though they brought in some guys like Mohamed Sanu. So I look at Julio Jones that if he could build on his touchdown totals, could be easily the number one player in fantasy football this season.
Okay, those are some big names on everyone's radar. Is there any one player this year that you're targeting as a dark horse who's really going to stand out in 2016 who's not on everyone else's radar yet?
Well, I mean, one of the guys that I'm looking at the turn or in the early third round is Mike Evans. And I'm not shy about going 3 wide receivers off the top. Like if I'm in the middle of the rounds, I've done some recent mocks where I've had trying to recall, but like I'll get AJ Green and I'll back him up with Allen Robinson. And if I see somebody like Mike Evans sitting there, I just feel like he's being way undervalued. Obviously there was a huge problem with him last year dropping the football. He had 147 targets, which usually if you get that large of a target share, it's seemingly impossible not to be in the top 20. And yet somehow Mike Evans found a way to do it. It's kind of like one of those comic book movies. Like, if you just make a comic book movie, whether it's good or not, it's going to be a box office smash. I think we've seen that over the last 2 summers. But Mike Evans found a way to not do that, and I think a big reason why was he was dropping the ball a lot, which scares people. And he also just had 3 touchdown receptions, which was a big problem. Like when those receivers, the one thing that separates them is the receptions. He had 12 as a rookie, 3 last year. I think coming into this season with having a full year with Jameis Winston, you looked at him last year, he had 6 rushing touchdowns, and that's not going to happen again. That's really not part of Winston's game. So I think if 5 of those translate over to red zone looks for Mike Evans, then he can get back to double-digit touchdowns. And I would be shocked if he didn't have double-digit touchdowns this year.
As far as the rookie picks, people who have never played it down in the NFL, who should we look at?
That's one of the things that always drives me crazy. Like everybody knows, like with Ezekiel Elliott, like that's the one thing. Like I firmly believe he could be the number 1 fantasy running back this season. I think that if you look at the Cowboys offensive line, if you look at what DeMarco Murray did 2 years ago, if you look at what Darren McFadden did last year, I don't think is given enough buzz. Like that might be more impressive than Eric Dickerson going for 2105 back in 1983 because that's incredible. Or it was 84, I think. But that's an incredible number for a guy who was just cast aside. Like it was almost to the point of like the Cowboys proving a point to the world of like, you know what, we can make any. It's like that Trading Places movie way back in the 80s. If you ever catch that on Netflix, it's fabulous. And like where they're like, we can make any running back 1,000-yard run. Let's just go get Darren McFadden. And then, boom, he does it. And then the Cowboys, of course, were so impressed with him that they went out and got 2 other running backs so they don't have to ever do that again. Like, it's like, okay, we did that once. Like, one time, like somebody who goes skydiving, like, I'll do that once. I'm not doing it again. So that's how they felt about Darren McFadden. But now you go back, you have Ezekiel Elliott there, and everybody goes through the whole rap of, they're like, he never played a down of NFL football. You're like, you know what? Neither did Todd Gurley last year, and how did that work out? And now Ezekiel Elliott's going to a team with a better offensive line, a better coach, a better receiver and talent around him. Like, I think he's going to be just fine. So that's one, but he's the most obvious one that everybody talks about. But I think if you're looking for a little bit of a deeper, like, sleeper type pick, Corey Coleman, who was one of the first I think he was the first wide receiver off the board. Him going to Cleveland was a pretty good option for him. That was actually a smart, like, it's weird when Cleveland makes a smart pick. You're like, oh, yeah, you guys seemingly made a good move right there. I'm not used to you doing that. Maybe it's the fact that LeBron James finally delivered an NBA title to Cleveland, that things are starting to change over there. They're like, okay, yeah, you're doing smart things. I think he's a great fit for that offense. Could have a lot of targets there. And of course, I think the guy that I like the most for the rookies is Sterling Shepard. He's amazing. You know, we saw him all 4 years at Oklahoma perform each and every season, even going back to his freshman season. And the one thing that I like about it, and I know a lot of people will say, well, hey, you know, Odell Beckham Jr. is there. Could we see a reduction for OBJ, or how is it going to be split? But when you look at it, OBJ was amazing last year, and I think he's going to do even better this season. And if you look at the number 2 wide receiver for the Giants, it was Rueben Randle, who had close to 800 yards and 8 touchdowns, which is amazing because Rueben Randle is not good when you compare him to other NFL players. I mean, he's better than me, but when you compare him to other NFL players, not so much. So I think that Sterling Shepard could easily get those numbers. I think it would be probably more likely that he gets closer to 1,000 receiving yards. If the 8 touchdowns remain the same, that's fine. But if he gets close to 1,000 receiving yards and 8 touchdowns, you're looking at a guy who's a viable bye-week replacement, possibly a flex starter. So he's somebody to really keep an eye on.
Those are some good picks for you. All right, I have to ask you. Here in New England, we love us some Tom Brady.
As you should. I think you guys need to appreciate him a little bit more.
I don't think that's possible.
I think there's some room for it.
All right, Adam. So for a QB like Tom Brady, who everyone in New England wants on their team, but he's sitting out the first 4 games of the season, what do we do?
The one thing you should be scared about in fantasy football, let's put it that way. Tom Brady's going to return and he's going to be great. He's going to return. I know the narrative is that he's going to play with a chip on his shoulder and everything like that. Like, Tom Brady always performs with a chip on his shoulder, it seems like. And last year, he was really good. He was a great fantasy quarterback, and I expect him to return and be even better, partly because of the players that they surrounded him with. I think Martellus Bennett was such a huge pickup for them. I mean, they gave away virtually nothing. And then, of course, Rob Gronkowski will be back. I think Chris Hogan is going to be a great option, too. And that's the one thing about New England that a lot of people don't give them credit for. And, you know, because there's a bunch of haters. There's a bunch of haters around the world who don't want to give the New England Patriots credit for anything. But when you look at their roster, you know, they really take cast-offs from other teams and do a great job of making them great. I mean, Wes Welker was a cast-off of the Chargers and the Dolphins. Randy Moss had a miserable season for the Oakland Raiders and then was reborn with one of the most prolific seasons in NFL history for a wide receiver. And then, you know, you look at Danny Amendola. You know, understandably, he's battled some injuries, but he's played pretty well. And Julian Edelman was a quarterback in college. And I feel like I'm preaching to the choir a little bit, you know, so I'm probably not saying anything that you guys don't already know. So I'll just get back to the point. But I would draft I wouldn't be afraid to draft Tom Brady. There's plenty of streamable quarterbacks you can play in that first month of the season. You can pick up Matthew Stafford. I've seen Andy Dalton not be drafted in leagues. And there's plenty of options out there. I don't think you need to be afraid. And the one thing I love drafting Tom Brady, I think what we saw out of him last year is going to happen this season. He's going to have a fantastic year. I think if you draft him and realize that he's going to have to hold a roster spot for 5 weeks, including a bye where he's not going to give you any points, again, and here come the authorities, because I'm espousing Tom Brady and talking about how great he is. He is the GOAT, by the way. I say this as somebody who is not a Boston fan. but he clearly is the GOAT.
I'm a little concerned that every time we talk about Tom Brady, the police sirens start going off. There's something funny going on over there at the NFL Network.
Believe me, I'm getting my car keys out right now, ready to bolt at any time. It's like Danny Ocean, in Ocean's 12, and you got to be ready to go at any point and see what happens. But I love him. I think he's a great pick. I think a lot of people are sleeping on him and just really not, they're making too much of it. I understand you can't have a full team of Le'Veon Bell, Tom Brady, Josh Gordon, and all these guys. But if you have to pick one guy from the suspension list who you want to roll with, I think it's going to be Brady, because he's going to be so much better than the other quarterbacks at the end of the season. You're going to be so happy that you have him. Just go stream a quarterback. Matthew Stafford is typically the one guy that I get the most whenever I do mocks and grab Brady. Andy Dalton's another option. Sometimes Phillip Rivers isn't even drafted. So there are a lot of quarterbacks out there, and just realize that it's a position that has a lot of balance and it has a lot of parity. So when you can find a guy who's an elite talent like Brady is and the numbers he's going to put up, I think it's worth the risk.
Okay, I have to ask you about another guy who's proposing a lot of questions at this point. In one of my leagues, I drafted Des Bryant first. I was really excited. Then we find out he gets a concussion during practice in the preseason, and we likely won't see him until the regular season. So for a guy like this, with incredible talent, but who is injury-prone, what is your suggestion?
Yeah, I mean, the concussions are obviously a concern. But the one thing that I look at is that last year was kind of an anomaly. I think that he can go out there and put up huge numbers this season. I know a lot of people have concerns not only for Des Bryant, but for also Tony Romo, who is coming back from his shoulder and collarbone injury. And the one thing that I'm not concerned about, though, is that when Des Bryant is on the field, he is getting the majority of the targets. He is their number one option. And I remember back in 2014 when DeMarco Murray was leading the league in rushes, that Des Bryant still had 16 touchdowns that season, which just shows me that this Cowboys offense is concentrated into the running back position and Des Bryant. There's no plan B. That's not like Devin Street or Cole Beasley or Terrence Williams or any of those guys are going to be taking targets from him. Jason Witten is going to be another year older. He's not the reliable threat he once was in the red zone. I think that it's clear cut that Des Bryant can be that number one guy, and it's risky in the first round. I know, and a lot of times his ADP is somewhere around pick 9, and it's tough for people. But you know what? If you insulate yourself, if you draft great receivers around him, if you go wide receiver heavy in the very beginning, then you can kind of weather that in case Des does have some sort of injury concerns. But you know what? It's the NFL. Everybody's got something. I could sit here and make a case for not drafting anybody. Be like, avoid everybody. It's a violent game. So it's a valid concern, but one that I'm willing to take a risk on just because his talent is so immense.
Okay, Adam, we're wrapping up with your time. Are there any other final words of wisdom you want to give to the people who are drafting this weekend?
Draft Gostkowski. Love him. No, just, that's the one thing is again, to reiterate what we were talking about off the top, just have a plan, but be willing to change it. Like Mike Tyson once said, that everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the mouth. So just realize that there's going to be some strange things that happen in your draft. Just don't be that person that does the strange things. Curb the booze, get everybody else drunk. That's always a big thing. That's the one thing that I always like to do is like, hey, if you go for mixed cocktails, you can really mask how much you're not drinking. Like if you go out and instead of getting a Diet Coke in a tall glass, if you get it in a bucket, throw a lime in there, everybody just assumes you're drinking a rum and Coke or something, or a bourbon and Coke or whatever. You're just throwing down Diet Pepsis, and you're looking smart, and those guys are over there drinking the Sculpin IPAs and getting all house before the draft and making crazy picks like Cordero Patterson because he's due, or Dorial Green Beckham. You let those guys do that. But go out there, have a good time, and realize the parties after the draft, when you laugh at everybody because you made such great salient picks, and they were out there being this boozy McImpulse pick, you'll be the one laughing. So that's pretty much all I got. Those are my words of wisdom.
And the secret to your success finally comes out. All right, that's it for this week. Good luck in your fantasy football drafts. We will have plenty to come throughout the season. Again, Adam Rank of the NFL Network. Follow him on Twitter for more, @AdamRank, and check him out on the NFL Network. And keep it locked on NESN.com for all your fantasy football news.